at 9:30 regular meeting. I am your host, Chris Winslow, and we welcome each and every one of you on this bright Thursday, hot day. And I'm going to ask Mr. Adkins, if you would please, sir, lead us in the pledge of allegiance. Please stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Right. We'll get right into the forum. Ms. Firestone. Thanks.
Town Ashland, Mr. Hodges.
Here.
Ms. Barnhart. Charles City County, Ms. Atkins.
Here.
Mr. Coda. Chesterfield County, Mr. Carroll. Mr. Holland. Mr. Winslow.
Present.
Mr. Miller. Houston County, Mr. Lumpkin.
Here.
Ms. Lascolette. Hanover County, Mr. Davis. Mr. Peterson. Ms. Pritchard. Henrico County, Ms. O'Bannon. Here. Mr. Thornton. Mr. Brannon. Duquesne County, Ms. Page. Mr. Tiller. Mr. Evelyn. Powhatan County, Mr. Williams. Ms. Carmack. City of Richmond, Mr. Addison. We have Mr. Jordan. I'll circle back and call the motion. Ms. Lynch, Dr. Newville, Mr. Jones, Ms. Nye, Ms. Robertson, and Ms. Jordan.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you. Capital Region Airport Commission, Mr. Rutledge. GRTC, Ms. Adams. Ms. Torres. Here. Thank you. RMTA, Ms. Dean. VDOT, Mr. Totten.
Here.
And Mr. Riblett.
Here.
CTAC, Ms. Erickson.
Here.
DRPT, Ms. Dubinsky.
Here.
Mr. Sparks. FHWA, Mr. Nelson.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning. Mr. Rucker.
Sorry, I'm here on behalf of
I got you. Sorry about that.
He counts as two.
FTA, Mr. Koenig. Right finders, Ms. Tisdale. Ms. Ruffin. And Virginia Department of Aviation, Mr. Harrington.
Here.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call for attendance for 2004.
Thank you so much, Ms. Firestone, and I just want to recognize Ms. Firestone. She's one of these unsung heroes that puts all of this together every time, and so if you would just give her a round of applause. It's good to express appreciation for people who are always working hard. We have two folks with us participating from a remote location today. One is Ms. Jordan, the other is Ms. Tisdale. Both within their limit for the statutory personal reasons request to participate remotely, and I would entertain a motion and recommend a decision to approve both members' request that it be in conformity with plan RBA policy, and that the voice of the remotely participating member can be heard by all persons at the primary meeting location. Is there a motion to affirm those two items?
I move we affirm this.
Thank you so much, Ms. O'Bannon. And a second, appreciate that, Mr. Hodges. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, wonderful. We now have consideration of amendments to the meeting agenda. Hopefully folks have had an opportunity to review the meeting agenda. Is there any items that you would like to see amended at this time? Anybody have a motion? Great. Do I need to approve the agenda then, or we just leave it alone? Leave it alone. All right, thank you, Council. RRTPO Chair's report. All right, so as you know, I have been invited to be chair this year, and we sort of did a little bit of a swap of Chesterfield and Hanover, and so it's my delight to do that. We do have a limited schedule this year. I asked staff to try to condense some of our meetings, so you'll note, just for the record, that our next meeting is not until November the 2nd, I believe, correct? November the 2nd. So just keep a mental note, we will not be meeting in October, but we are trying to be more efficient with everyone's meeting schedule, because if it's like mine, I know that you all have plenty to go to, plenty to do. So that's what I would say with that. We have a chock full agenda today. At this time, we'll open a public comment period. Is there any member of our public who would like to comment at this time, either online or with us? Maybe. No. Okay. All right, very good. Seeing none, hearing none, we will now move on to the minutes. Number 5. Hopefully folks have had an opportunity to review the RRTPO policy board meeting minutes from that date. And if you have, then have no objection. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Motion from Mr. Longo, second from Mr. Williams. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. All right, this time I will hand it over to Mr. Parsons, who has a lengthy secretary's report for us this morning, but chock full of good stuff. Mr. Parsons.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will try not to extend this any longer than necessary. If you'll turn to page 2 of the agenda, item 6, A and B are both information items. A is our work status and financial reports for both June and July of 23, and that is well, June was our last fiscal year. July is the first month of fiscal year 24, which we are currently in. We have the work status report matches the quarterly reporting format that we use for VDOT, and breaks down each of our work tasks into sections in that work status report. For those who are not familiar with this, and we tracked our budgeted amounts from our work program, and then our current allocations of staff time and resources and consultant fees when necessary to meet those tasks. So that's 6A is the June and July report. And then 6B is essentially our summary report for all of last fiscal year of our annual report to show all of the work tasks that staff has undertaken to meet the demands of our work program and the requests and considerations that each of you in your localities provided for the work that we do. So it's fairly lengthy. It's our annual report. We do provide a lot of detail in terms of what staff has been involved with. So that is there for your information. Item 6C, this is an action item. As many of you know, I, as of last Friday, have taken a new position as Executive Director of the Central Virginia Transportation Authority. So I am stepping away from my role as Director of Transportation at RRTPO and subsequently the Secretary of the TPO. So this will be my last meeting next to the chair, but with that change, I would request that the TPO consider designating Miles Bushing, who is a longtime staff member and a great guy, to serve as Secretary of the TPO effective tomorrow, September 8th, with duties and powers as outlined in the RRTPO bylaws. Miles is stepping in as the Interim Director of Transportation for Plan RBA, and I'm very excited to continue working with him and the rest of the team as we make the region move forward in the transportation world.
Let's pause there. Yes, Mr. Williams.
First, I'd like to share with the members of this organization what I told Chet privately. I'm very pleased about the selection that CVTA made and bringing Chet to the leadership of that organization. I think it's very important for the continuity of transportation planning in this region, to have somebody that's experienced, I would say combat tested, that's going to be rising to the occasion. Moving forward with planning and implementing transportation in this region. So I think it's a wonderful selection for the region, and I would like to thank Chet for all his contributions to this organization and for his service. So well done, sir.
Here, here.
And is that a motion?
It's seconded.
Okay. And any discussion on that? All in favor? Aye. Do I need a motion? All right, let's
I move that this body recognize the contributions of Mr. Chet Parsons for his service for this organization and to the greater Richmond region.
and that we designate Miles Bushing as Secretary of the RRTPO effective September 8 with duties and powers therein.
Absolutely.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome, Miles. Item 6D on the Secretary's report. Janice has a very important piece of paper for everybody to take a look at. We are trying to update member contact information. So please make sure before you leave that you're able to get that form from her and okay, she's passing it out now, even better. So that we can keep up with you and the best way to keep you in the loop on all the things that are going on here. I did want to ask Sid Kumar to come to the podium briefly to talk about some of the improvements that are being made to our YouTube channel. As you know, since COVID started, we have relied heavily on virtual participation and the ability to share our meetings, and everything in the last 3 years that we have done in this room in front of a camera has been recorded, and it is available for public consumption on our YouTube channel. So this is kind of a refresh of that and a new way to organize it. So Sid, just take a couple minutes and review that, please.
Thank you, Chad.
You're good.
Okay. First time being in front of the camera. Okay. Good. All right. Cool. So as you can see, I made some changes to the YouTube page just because I had a lot of comments of it being hard to find, and a lot of the YouTube meetings have faces and images of mid-talk, mid-screen, things like that. We don't want to have that image and stuff like that. So I went ahead and started creating just a more uniform way to find our YouTube videos, and then keeping with the branding theme and colors. First of all, when you go to our main YouTube page, you will see that at the home page, you have the live video, which is currently the meeting right now. So anybody that comes into our page will know where to go exactly to watch the current meeting. And then if you go down below, I've separated to Plan RVA, TPO, and CBTA. And then underneath that, you'll see Policy Board, Executive Committee, and all the other committees below. When you go inside the, you go to the full playlist, you should be able to find all the meeting dates for every single meeting. And I'm still working on cleaning up a little bit of few, but you should be able to go and see all the meetings from current all the way to 2021. As you can see, I still have some more to do, but this is what it's going to look like, so that anybody going to our page, every single playlist will have the designated meetings for it. And then same thing with Plan RVA. So this is a little redesign, just kind of help improve our page, and going forward, the public can be able to easily find our meetings and access everything we need to. So, yep, thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, I would like to add one more item to the Secretary's report and take a minute to introduce a very important new staff member. I wanted to introduce Holly Gordon, who is our new Community Engagement Manager. And Holly's going to be reaching out to many of you as we continue to try and improve our position in the community and share the great work that that all three of our organizations are doing together. So please take a minute if you haven't met and say hi to Holly either today or in the near future.
Welcome. Great. All right, we're on to new business, and this is the rural public transportation overview. And
I will start, yes, sir.
very good.
So on page 72 is a brief staff report. It kind of provides a little bit of a summary of our ongoing discussions about rural public transportation. This is something that many of our rural localities have been talking about essentially since the CBTA was created. Part of what we do at the CBTA is set aside 15% of funds for GRTC to look at public transportation services that meet the needs of the entire region, all 9 jurisdictions. As you know, fixed route buses are not the only option for our region. That network does not extend to all 9 jurisdictions. So there have been ongoing conversations about different options and opportunities for serving the needs of everybody in our region in many different ways. There are some pilot programs that are currently underway that GRTC is taking the lead on. But as discussions have, I don't want to intensified is not the right word, but have continued through this summer, we've asked for the assistance of Tiffany and her team at DRPT, as well as Adrian and the GRTC group to help us come up with a slate of options that may be considered as possible opportunities for the region. So we've asked Tiffany to prepare a brief presentation today to start to lay out those options and talk a little bit about what we might be considering for the region.
Good morning, Mr. Minsky. How are you?
Good morning.
Morning.
I think this is actually the first time I've actually stood on the podium. I'm used to being able to sit at the table. So thank you for that introduction, Chet, and good morning to the members of the board as well as in the audience. For the number of you who may not know me, my name is Tiffany Dubinsky. I am a statewide transit planning manager with the Department of Rail and Public Transportation. And in particular, I've also had the luxury of most of my career here in the Richmond region. So this is sort of a near and dear topic to my heart. So as Chet mentioned, we've seen over the last maybe year and a half, 2 years, an increased interest in really expanding what public transportation options may be in the Richmond region. And I believe when Director DeBrule came in around April to present about some of the initiatives that DRPT has been working on, a large conversation centered around Mr. Peterson's discussion about Hanover Dash and their relationship with DRPT to develop that program, and then thinking about what kind of other models and options there could be for some of the other localities within the region. And so I was tasked, and I'm sorry that it has taken me several months to follow up, to just kind of give you information, one, on the various programs that DRPT administers year to year, because we do manage multiple grant programs, which I've mentioned through agency updates or just through conversation with various members of the board, but also to give you some ideas about example projects. And so while we do talk about specialized transportation or microtransit, I want to expand the options to think about other service models that may be a right size fit for you all. And then think about how we can direct a technical advisory committee to be able to explore what those options can be in partnership with us at DRPT, with GRTC, and with Plan RVA. So next slide. So I will start with our special programs. I actually manage all these programs now as of just last month. But in particular, these are programs that we have in addition to our merit capital and operating assistance programs that provide various levels of technical assistance to our transit agencies, as well as localities, MPOs, PDCs, and other eligible partners. And so there's 4 that fall under this umbrella. First is our workforce development, and this one is a rebrand of what we used to call our public transportation intern program, and I'll explain that in the next slide. But we also have technical assistance, demonstration, and then transit ridership incentive program, which I think you've all heard of. Next slide now. So workforce development. So in previous years, we have had this program available for internships. But what we found was that a lot of our transit agencies and partners interpreted internships as just planning, scheduling, and so forth. But as we've seen the nature of where our industry is looking for needs, it's really been expanding to really training. So whether it is helping to develop programs for commercial driver's licenses or just de-escalation, anything like that, we wanted to make sure the program was a little bit more representative of what we could provide for funding assistance. And so what we did with workforce development was that we expanded it so it's interns as well as apprentices and training programs. And we're finding that our agencies and partners are being more creative in terms of what potential projects may be. So this may end up being a little bit bigger than that. But we wanted to make sure that this program was illustrative of this being a support for them in terms of having that pipeline and getting more people into the public transportation industry. To note, the match rate is at 80% state, 20% local match. And then the list of eligible applicants is there. That includes transit agencies, local governments, any public service corporations, PDCs and MPOs, and then human service agencies, as well as commuter assistance programs. Next slide. Now this here is kind of where I have constantly talked about technical assistance, and this is where the catch-all for all of our planning efforts falls under. So we support everything from our required transit development plans and transit strategic plans for our transit agencies. We've also done commuter assistance program strategic plans, or that CAP SP acronym up there. And then you've seen more transit feasibility studies. So if you're looking at trying to see where transit might be viable within an area or locality, all the way up to transit governance studies, like what was done with CVTA. We've also seen fare evaluation. So if you're exploring what kind of options you may want to look at fares, going from zero fare to a reduced fare, or different fare models, cost allocation models, it really is a kind of a range as long as the planning effort. So we see a lot of applications come through. I think last year was our record of 43 applications for this program. So we provide the 50% state match to cover that with a 50% local match. There are other ways that we can be creative to reduce the local match burden if needed, but this is something that I usually tell agencies or localities that if you want to have a conversation to be able to think about what transit may look like, this is where we encourage people to go through. Same list of eligible applicants, and really the focus is that there needs to be a transit focus, because sometimes we do get larger scale applications for planning efforts, but we really want to focus on the transit component when looking at this. Next slide. And then this one here is kind of the next step. So once we encourage agencies or localities to do a transit study of any type, they will have usually a recommendation that comes out. That recommendation then informs what would be their demonstration application. And this here is what you've seen fund a lot of the local projects here. In particular, Chesterfield County's, their Route 111 was funded through DRPT's demo program. But this in particular started off as just for new service. So when I started back in 2017, this was really just for if you had a new route that you wanted to test, a new express commuter route, things of that nature. But we've also seen it expand. So now we've allowed for innovation and technology pieces. So driver assistance systems to be able to allow to know when pedestrians are in a blind spot for a vehicle. Low-speed automated shuttles, like the ones the demonstration program also funded that for Fairfax County. So if you were ever in the Mosaic District running around and there was a shuttle with Dominion, that was a project that we helped fund. And then microtransit. So I have talked about what Bay and MEAC had done. That was through FTA, but we have also sponsored other microtransit demonstration grants through this program. We aim for roughly about 12 to 18 month timeframe. So that usually gives about a year of actual service and then some time to do both planning and an evaluation piece. And we always have that as a deliverable because demonstration is also to provide information for anyone else who may want to actually implement these similar services in their area. The match rate is 80% state, 20% local. And this one is going to be the eligible applicants are going to be more limited to those who can actually either operate or procure services for transportation. So that's why you only see transit agencies, local governments, and in some cases, some PDCs and MPOs.
One question on this, Mr. Binsky. Are these demonstration project allowances, 12 to 18 month timeframe, but are they eligible for repeating? In other words, sometimes 12 or 18 months may not be a window where an evaluation really gives you an idea of, is this going to work or not?
Right.
Is it eligible for, I guess, a recurrence?
You can do some extensions if you need additional time. So we did have a multiple number through COVID, for example. We also have entertained subsequent demonstrations that have either expanded a service So there are some examples that I'll talk about that we started off with a phase 1, and then they said that they wanted to continue pursuing that, so they expanded service. So there are some options that you could do subsequent years. All right, next slide. And so this here in particular, I just wanted to demonstrate the 2 different types that are under demonstration. As of right now, with microtransit, we started off as innovation in technology, but as it's become a little bit more tested and commonplace, we may see it turn into new service. But there are just some distinctions that we always want to make sure that if it's new service, we don't want it to be something that is replacing a discontinued route. And we want it to really focus with new service on areas or markets that are not currently served. And then with technology, that can be in areas that have current public transportation services, but we want to test new concepts and proof. And demonstration really is about mitigating the risk for testing some new ideas or services for the locality or the agency, and then to be able to help them plan accordingly if it is successful into some sort of sustainable operations. Next slide. This one is TRIP. This is our Transit Ridership Incentive Program. This was created in 2020 as part of the Transportation Omnibus Bill. Many of you are familiar with this for the first 2 kind of funding components, which was the regional connectivity and zero fare and low income. In particular, it's important for me to highlight that in the next week or so, the Commonwealth Transportation Board will be voting on some modifications to the program to expand eligibility. It doesn't have quite relevance to you all in terms of today's discussion, but I do want to note that TRIP has also expanded as an option for programs to explore, agencies to explore extension of services, or in the case for like GRTC, they were able to do their microtransit through TRIP as well. So we're seeing that there's a natural connectivity as agencies may be going through technical assistance, demonstration, and then to TRIP to be able to kind of extend the life of how they could test out some new services and transportation options, and then eventually be able to develop that plan into regular operations. But I do want to highlight that we are expanding TRIP so that crime prevention and public safety, as well as passenger amenities and facilities, if approved, will be part of our program. Next slide, please. In particular, I always want to remind everyone about regional connectivity, and this was highlighted only for certain geographic areas that hit this criteria of roughly about 100,000 in population. And so this map here is the most current map before we have the modifications applied, but this is mostly for urbanized area. Richmond is one of those areas that can apply for regional connectivity projects. And there are eligible project types that can include development or improvement of regionally significant transit routes, creation of any kind of financial subsidy models, deployment of integrated fare payment, and then addition of bus-only lanes on regionally significant corridors. This program is funded at a step-down model, and it can be up to 5 years. And then the eligible recipients you may see there is everything from public service corporations, transportation district commissions, local governments, and even some private nonprofit transit providers. Next slide. And then zero fare and low income. This one was very popular within our first couple of years of the TRIP program. And this really does focus on either deployment of an entirely zero fare system. We've also seen the elimination of fares on maybe high capacity corridors or establishing zero fare zones, or even just subsidized or fully free passes for certain targeted populations. So this says low income, but that could also be for others like students or other identified disadvantaged populations. And this program is up to 3 years. Next slide. So to kind of bring this all together, I wanted to make sure that I emphasize how we provided this pipeline from concept to testing and then to implementation. So I think I've reiterated enough about technical assistance, about doing a feasibility study to explore your options, using the recommendations from that study to develop what would be your pilot service, applying for that in demonstration, and then if eligible, thinking about further support that could be through TRIP regional connectivity, and then at the end of it, operational service. So how do you transition this after you get all this funding from us or from other federal discretionary grants, state grants, other competitive grants into operations with a transit provider? And so I want to give some examples of projects. Next slide. And this is not a holistic, this is the sample that I can be able to talk to with some proficiency of projects that we have funded over the past 5 years. So everything from Roanoke County with their McAfee Knob Trailhead Shuttle that really focused on alleviating the congestion around the actual parking lot that was servicing there. There's the Bedford Otter Bus, which introduced new transit service within the town in partnership. Afton Express, which is for Central Shenandoah Planning District Commission with Bright. They operate that service between Charlottesville and then the Stanton-Waynesboro area. Shengo, which is in Shenandoah County. Greater Lynchburg Transit Company, or GLTC, they are now introducing a microtransit pilot within Lynchburg. We've already talked about GRTC with their microtransit, also Route 11 and Route 60 in partnership with Chesterfield County. Albemarle County also is introducing a microtransit pilot that's in partnership with Charlottesville Area Transit, or CAT. And then there's Bay Transit and then Mountain Empire Older Citizens with their microtransit pilots. The last two are currently in study phases, but I thought it was worthwhile to mention, which is with the city of Franklin and Giles County. So now I'm just going to highlight some of those projects. And I think first of all, next slide, is important for Shenandoah County. So I have a little bit of history. I worked a couple of years in Shenandoah County as well as with Martha Schickel. But back in 2018, they came with an idea of thinking, how could we introduce some transportation services within Shenandoah County? So they applied for a technical assistance grant, and that was led by the regional commission up there. The feasibility study identified what would be the service model, and then they applied for a demonstration grant in 2020. This was to procure services. They went with Virginia Regional Transit to pilot 2 routes in the county. So it's a north-south option between Strasburg and Newmarket. And the geography of it follows very much 81, so it really makes sense for a north routes connection. They charged $1 fare each. And what was important in particular was that it was not just with the regional commission in the county, but they also identified potential employers. So they also got local contributions from Walmart, the Memorial Hospital, a couple other like Newmarket Poultry, and then they are currently still operating the service. The demonstration funds run out, I believe, June 2020 or 2024, and then they will operate under 5311 funding moving forward. And so they have more information on their website, but this was kind of the first time we had seen a new service in my time at DRPT, and they followed kind of that natural pipeline of being able to work with us to subsidize the cost and then to be able to mitigate that risk until they were able to run it. Next slide. The next one is Afton Express. So this one, like I mentioned earlier, was with Central Shenandoah Planning District Commission. And so they operate Bright, which is their own transit operation or agency. They came in 2017 for technical assistance, and then subsequently in 2019 for looking at both feasibility study and then what would the service operations plan look like. They had always found that there was a need to connect between the Charlottesville area and the Stanton-Waynesboro, and the lift of going up Afton Mountain was always a little bit daunting for some of their commuters. So they thought there was going to be a market for it. So they came in, they did the study, they applied in 2021 for a demonstration grant, and then 2022, so to your earlier point, subsequent funding to be able to finalize the planning and then launch a 2-year pilot service. They charge about $3 fare for one way. They also have options for a 10 ride fare card. They expanded the service just earlier this year to add expanded AM and PM times and then add a new stop at the Omni that's right downtown in Charlottesville. They also did some modifications to existing departure times. So it's very important that we also allow some changes in the service as they operate through. But they received local funding from all the localities as well as UVA. And then there's a coordination with the transfer point with the Charlottesville Area Transit with the service. Yes.
Is the back door, is that for wheelchair?
Yes, that is a wheelchair.
I've seen that, but I wanted to see.
No, it's fine. Next slide. The next one I'll mention is Bedford Otterbus. So as I mentioned before, town of Bedford, they currently do not have any existing transportation services. But they started a partnership with the Bedford Community Health Foundation, and they launched for themselves a 6-month pilot in September 2021. And it operated a loop through major destination or activity centers within the town. They found through engagement with us that we would be able to provide some technical assistance, so they applied for a demonstration grant in 2022 to continue the pilot. What they identified was that there is probably a larger scale that they could go. So they identified a 3-year plan, and so they applied this past year in 2023 to expand the services over a 3-part plan to help be able to develop the sustainable operations. They experienced within the first year 74% growth in their average monthly ridership. The route itself is just one route, and it has 17 stops. They only operate on certain days, so Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, within 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. And they procured services through a third-party provider, RideSource in this case. But this one was something that they actually started themselves, and then they found that they were running out of money very quickly, so they engaged us to be able to see how we could support it, and now we're helping them out as they figure out what's the appropriate size for their service, and then how they can be able to incorporate that into regular operations for them. Next slide. I wanted to highlight JLTC's microtransit pilot. So they had multiple discussions starting back in 2020 among their board about what microtransit could look like. They had just closed down the Hopper, which was a smart scale transit service that they had procured, and they thought maybe we want to explore it, but they didn't want to just go in and just procure services and try it out. So we agreed to help fund a microtransit feasibility study that was completed in 2022 that looked within the city of Lynchburg, as well as partnerships with GLTC and their current as well as planned future service. And so they applied after the study for both a demonstration and a trip grant. And what we identified, because they had 2 service zones, was that we wanted to be able to support them in completely. So it was going to be launching this year as 1 demonstration grant. The caveat was that with TRIP, we didn't want to commit them to roughly a 5-year contract if it didn't prove to be successful. So we said that let us go ahead, do it with demonstration, see if it's viable, and then you can apply for TRIP in another year to see if we can continue that. And so they're going to run this service. They're going to purchase the software as a service. So just to kind of scale that back, when we talk about microtransit, a lot of these deployments have been focused on just procuring the software to be able to do the trip matching and as well as the planning on the operator side, but they will use the existing drivers and the existing vehicles in order to run the service. And so that's what GLTC is going to do here. Next slide. And then last, I promised that I was going to provide information on our FTA grant for the microtransit pilots in Bay Transit as well as Mountain Empire Older Citizens. And so this one is a little bit more unique versus the pipeline that I have been talking about, where we applied through FTA for their Integrated Mobility and Innovation Grant. And we also received funds from the state for their Innovation Technology Transportation Fund, or ITTF. And so the goal for this was really just testing microtransit solutions in rural communities, because we had only seen deployments in more urban areas, which already had the density and support for kind of transit services. So we identified that maybe we'd be able to test some solutions in rural transit areas and see what that would look like. So we engaged Bay Transit and Mountain Empire, and they're on opposite sides of the state. So they already run demand response service, so they had some existing foundation to operate the service. And then we procured through contract, and we went with VIA on this one, their software package to be able to implement it. So they implemented 2 service zones. One was in Wise, Virginia for Mountain Empire, and then the other was in for Gloucester, Virginia for Bay Transit. Next slide. And just to give you context, I mean, Bay Transit is close to us, but just for just kind of for understanding, so they are a transportation provider. They cover the Middle Peninsula, Northern Neck, Charles City, and New Kent counties. They provide demand responsive service, and they also have 2 deviated fixed route lines, one of which was where the microtransit zone was focused on, which was called the Hive Express. They launched this service June 28th, 2021, so right in the middle of the pandemic. We decided that we already got the funding, we had to spend it within a certain time, so we were committed to launching it. But what we found was that pandemic didn't hinder the performance. And so they operated within about 12-month timeframe. And then they found that this was something they wanted to continue to pursue. So they came in after the funds for the FTA grant expired to apply for a demonstration grant in 2022 to expand the service. So with Bay Transit, they wanted to look at overlaying microtransit on the Hive Express to be able to provide first mile, last mile connection to the existing deviated fixed route. They found that more people were doing the microtransit zone versus actually riding the route. So they are using the demonstration funds to completely eliminate the deviated fixed route and run an expanded microtransit zone along that whole corridor where the Hive Express was. And they will add additional vehicles because they were really only running 1 vehicle plus a spare. So that started just October last year, and then we're seeing the results through until about September of this year. And the next slide, just to give a kind of scale. So this was the zone that they started off with on the left. And I'm sorry if the text is a little hard to read on here, but they had identified popular destinations that were centered around kind of the Gloucester courthouse. So Food Lion, Walmart, there's always a Walmart that comes in with service.
Excuse me one
Yes.
second, I'm from Gloucester, let me tell you something, when that Walmart came in, you would have thought it was Lego in Chesterfield. Yeah, people were parked out there. I don't know what they were doing in the parking lot, but that was a whole thing in high school.
Yeah, we are not going to talk about the parking lot at Walmart, but most people we find that a lot of our microtransit or just even new transit has a huge focus point on Walmart. So that is probably my number one criteria for success. But there's also Aldi, there's shops at Gloucester, even Lowe's. So they identified these points, but we saw through the data as they were running the microtransit service that they needed to expand it. People were actually walking 1 to 2 miles to get within the eligible service zone in order to get the services. So they worked with VIA to be able to modify it, and so they expanded the zone to the first half on the right, and now the demonstration covers that full corridor, so it's the whole north-south corridor. So now, in addition to Walmart, there's also the Gloucester High School, so it's picking up students there, urgent care, Kroger, Walgreens, and Food Lion. Right now, it's a little still early to say how they view this, but Gloucester County has committed to investment on continuing this service, and they may end up expanding for further service depending on where the funding and the demand is. Next slide. The other is Mountain Empire Older Citizens, or MEOC for short. They provide demand responsive services in Southwest Virginia. So the counties of Lee, Scott, and Wise, as well as the city of Norton, Monday through Friday. They are curb-to-curb service, so it's usually on request. It has in the past been your typical 24-hour reservation. When we engaged with them, they said that this was something, what could they lose? Because we were covering most of the cost. So they launched their service as well, June 28th, 2021. They also currently operate fare-free through a trip grant that they applied for. So they aren't charging any fares for their service. And then what they found was that this was wildly successful. So just this past cycle, they applied for a demonstration grant to expand the service from one zone to 2. So now we'll go to Big Stone Gap in Appalachia, and then they have plans and later this year as well to Duffield, and then even 2024 to the town of Pennington Gap in Jonesville. They have probably gotten the most media coverage, I will say. A lot of people have talked about the Virginia Mercury article, but just on a national level as well, about just how well this service has operated for them, but also the rider stories about how it's helped those who may have opioid addictions, who are having issues getting to jobs or being able to maintain jobs because they couldn't get reliable transportation. They have so many rider stories that they've been able to collect, which is something that I found very valuable as part of their pilot. Next slide.
So,
Yes.
and the net go then it says demand responsive, is it to their home?
It goes,
To the location?
it will go, some will go door to door, but mostly still curb to curb. So they will provide the riders, there's only like 2 vehicles, so it's usually the same drivers that will operate the service. So they develop a relationship and an advocacy point to be able to help with the kind of more recurring trip riders. Right now, they're only seeing maybe like 1 to 3 people, like 1 to 3 trips per person. But there is a component for door to door if they have the ability to do so.
And there's no charge?
Right now, it's no charge.
Gosh, because we're charging $3 and stuff.
Now, mind you, they are applying, it's subsidized through the trip grant, so they have only a certain amount of years before they go through, but they found that they were really, it was more expensive to actually collect the fares rather than to be able to operate without it. So they're probably going to find a model to be able to run without collecting any fares moving forward.
Usually they use the IDs, don't they?
I'm not 100% sure about their fare collection process, if they have something that is simply as tap. They also have options for unbanked, so still have some cash options available for
Yeah,
those,
we can see
which,
what this is.
yes.
Yeah, where that would be, you don't have a credit card.
yes. And that is a challenge about services like this, about being able to accommodate those who may not have a credit card or a bank account or even a smartphone to be able to still use these services. And we're still kind of exploring those options as well. And so to kind of give a scale about their service zone, on the left, they started off in the same capacity, identifying some key destinations, UVA Wise, Walmart, of course, and the post office. But they did the same thing as Bay Transit, where they found that there were people who were walking distances to get into the service zone. So they modified it halfway through their pilot to also include some employers, the magistrate office for Wise County, and then the public schools. So their zone, when they do their expansion launching later this year, will be roughly about a couple miles south or northeast, and then that will provide extra expanded coverage for them in that area. So all that to say is that as a result of, next slide, as a result of these pilots, there was the last component for the FTA grant, which was to do a case study. But we took it a little bit step further, saying that we went through this effort to test these microtransit services in rural areas, but why not also give some tools for anyone who may also be thinking about it. So this is available on our RRTPO website, and I can also send it directly to anyone who may want it. But in addition to getting interviews with all of the transit providers, also kind of their lessons learned, there is also some information about what would be kind of a strategy for sustaining operations, starting from if you are getting discretionary funding to what would be available funding moving forward, and then just a checklist about what would be suitable conditions in order to operate some sort of microtransit services within a rural area. So I encourage, if you are curious about that, it's not a long document. I made that intentional, but it's something that if you were starting the conversation, is a good resource to begin. And with that, that was not a brief presentation, but I am glad to be able to open up the floor for any kind of comments, questions moving forward.
I just wanted to clarify, I think we'll provide links to the presentation
Yes.
as well as the study
Yes.
for everybody, and we can send that out after the meeting. So I think that's
Questions from Mr. Benson?
Yes,
Please.
Tiffany, thank you for your presentation. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for getting, or Jeff, for getting that information out, so that shows the links for the presentation and the report. Going back to the reason I requested, this discussion here today is because there was a concern in the rural localities that we didn't know what we need to know. Going back to the expression, we didn't know what we didn't know. And as a body, we are the transportation people for the region. And yet there was this hole in the donut called the rural localities where we didn't have the transportation that you see in Richmond and Racco, Chesterfield. It didn't exist. I mean, we had volunteer ridership programs and things like that. And then I heard about what was going on in Hanover with Dash and how they had worked with you to do the study, to bring transportation to that rural county and actually make it happen. I mean, presentations have been done to the American Planning Association, because this was really something exciting that the board and the county got behind because there was a need. I tried to bring that idea of that cookie cutter to Powhatan County, as you may remember, to share that information because it was exciting. It was something we didn't know that we could do. So through the course of going through that exercise with you and Hanover, I wanted to share that with the other rural jurisdictions because I was confident they were like me. They didn't know what was available through your resources. So thank you again, for your presentation this morning, because we are right now on the cusp of something happening with transportation with GRTC, and we're working our way through it. We've had a couple of meetings with Ms. Torres, trying to refine, our needs, our requirements in the county. And one of the things that, we focused on was microtransportation in and of itself really doesn't meet our needs. There's another component, out there for the paratransit, for people in the rural counties to be able to discover or be able to provide the transportation where the trips are needed. And that's to medical appointments, maybe it's the VA, Social Security, all the things that got documented with the creation of DASH. We have the same needs in Powhatan County. So through this requirements definition that we're doing right now with GRTC, we're sharing that information because we're not linked to the rest of the region. And that's now been recognized. So we have to figure out a way, if we're going to use microtransportation and work, in concert with GRTC, we have to make this work with some type of hybrid, where it's going to be not only just microtransportation to a certain part of the county, but how do we extend transportation to the rest of the county for the transportation disadvantaged, as well as people with disabilities, people that have to have the trips outside of Powhatan County to the Richmond region for the medical appointments, et cetera. So as I understand where we're headed today is to make a recommendation for further study. I'm not sure what the recommendation is. But as a regional body, I think it's important now that we have this discussion about rural transportation for the rural jurisdictions, because you've heard me say this, when I was on CVTA and in this body as well. We're the workforce for the Richmond region. Any regional transportation plan has to include the rural jurisdictions. And so now that we are in CVTA and we have this opportunity to expand out with transportation, I think it's incumbent on us as a regional body to get it right and get it on the table as we're doing here today. And embrace this as an organization. So I'm excited about this. I think it's a real opportunity to move transportation forward in the rural jurisdictions. So again, thank you guys for what you did.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Yes, Mr.
I also thank you for the presentation. And Mr. Williams, page 72, there's two places where it says requested action, two short sentences. At the top, direct the TAC to review the regional public transportation system and rural locality concerns about current plans and services. At the bottom, requested action, motion to direct the TAC to review rural locality public transportation needs and make recommendations for further action. And at our executive committee meeting, I mentioned that I would ask, what are we asking? I would ask for clarification. What are we asking TAC to deliver? And are we giving them any direction? And what I'd like to do is connect you, and every time when you even give us your updates from your seat, I realize you are involved in so many things all over the state with a variety of areas that have seemingly a variety of needs. The theme I picked up in what you presented was they start out in an area and they find expansion. They need to expand. So that seems to be a theme. I think it would be helpful to meet Mr. Williams' goals, and I think everybody's goals here is get us closer to a deliverable, as close as we can to guiding what we want from the TAC without, pre-deciding things. But you have years of involvement in these things. We need to connect somehow all of your knowledge and your experience and that you're overseeing all these experiences to guide TAC. Because I think when I talked to our TAC representative, there wasn't clarity that there's been a lot of discussion yet. Now, I know we said earlier that, well, this is sort of the point, is to have them dive in. But I think we will be doing ourselves and the region a good positive move because I don't think they don't have to start from scratch, I don't think.
No.
So I'd love to get your thoughts. I know it's a policy board decision. I'm not trying to push policy board decisions to you, but from my view, is we need to be very clear and tap into your experience, your knowledge. That you can, and it's not just yours, but it's all the people that have been doing all these things. There's a lot of experience out there that we need to get that to our TAC and guide them without judging too much where they end up. That's sort of a question embedded in there. Can you help me? Can you help us connect all these experiences that you're overseeing to where we're trying to get with our?
So we could be direct, and I can ask some of our agencies that have done these demonstrations to actually speak to TAC and maybe talk about their experiences. So you have different ranges I mentioned from other planning district commissions as well as local governments, and maybe that's a good start to kind of understand where the need is. The important thing was that they had two different perspectives of where their transit needs were. One was more anecdotal, thinking that people, needed to get to their hospital appointments. But then when they did the study, they found that through the combination of looking at land use development, economic development, the growth population, that there was a different need that came together. So while I do have a lot of expertise, I don't want to discredit that there is still a lot of knowledge at the local level that needs to be accounted to defining what your needs are. So I can start with facilitating the conversation. Maybe it is a peer discussion that we could do in a hybrid capacity because they are all over the state, but just to be able to open a conversation of saying, how has it been, but also give the experience maybe a little too ahead, but just about how it has been a learning experience to administer these services. And I think that's the other part that I want to make sure that we preface is that we can identify these needs, but also building the resources within for each of our rural localities to be able to manage this, because there's going to be a point that it will have to be sustained within each locality in some capacity. But I can promise that we can also think about ways, and we've already talked about this with Plan RVA and with GRTC, to think about a larger scale study or maybe more individualized studies that could target each of the rural localities, because I think when you go too high level on a regional scale, there's sometimes some nuances that are missed that could be captured on a more locality level. So we can explore what TAC may want to approach that with. And then I think the idea was that I talk about all these grant programs, and I'm putting myself a little bit on the hook, but to say that come in for an application, let's do a technical assistance, figure out a way that we can deploy a study, whether that would be in-house with Plan RVA and their staff or with consultant services, and then actually complete a study that would be useful for you all to identify what you would want to deploy in terms of future service. Those were kind of the general ideas, and I just wanted to give these resources to you all to see what you were prepared to do, and then how TAC can use that information based off of your direction to move forward as a whole.
Mr. Williams.
John, thank you for your comments. I came in late this morning. We had a traffic situation in the region. I don't know who we talked to about traffic in the region, but I was late.
That's behind me.
Tail end of John's comments about what he's just brought forward. I too am concerned, that was a reason, for the emotion, because I want to be clear. What I learned from y'all, DRPT, in my discussions, about Hanover Dash, there is no one transportation solution for any rural locality. There is no one cookie cutter that you can say, Goochland, this is the model, and we can just give it to Powhatan County. We're all different,
Right.
And we have different resources that come together in every jurisdiction to provide this thing called transportation. It has different forms, and that was one of the things that Hanover learned. They had different ridership programs within the community that did different types of trips. But they all came together through the study they did to create this thing called transportation in Hanover County. I think that's what we're looking for in the rural jurisdictions, not to predetermine that there is one solution, there's one vendor, this is the way you do it. I would like to see a more deep dive study being done in each one of the localities, not at 500 feet, but actually something analogous to what you did over in Hanover, where you identify the existing transportation resources, identify the gaps, and determine where the trips need to go, and then craft a solution. I don't want to come in with the solution ahead of the requirements definition. So if that's helpful, and that goes back to the motion, I want to make sure when we refer to the Technical Advisory Committee that we actually incorporate that type of granularity across the different rural jurisdictions so that we can come up with what to be all the available options that we can bring into play to provide transportation in our communities.
Mr. Chairman, I have to follow up real quickly. You, in your response to me, you said something that, and I'm going to have our TAC advisor come back and watch this program, so I really appreciate your input, because I don't know how we'll craft all what you just described in a motion, but certainly I think.
I have the same problem.
But I think if we have our TAC folks come back and listen to this this segment of this meeting, it might be helpful, but you said something in your response to me that caught my ear. It's a little bit of a side, but I think it's important, and you're probably, I gather from your presentation, you might be in the middle of this, sustainability. You talked about how these things, and that's something we should be thinking about now. And again, with all these programs that you're overseeing and involved in, these folks are further down the road. Like, okay, we've started with some needs, we're identifying expanded needs, whether geography or certain demographics or whatever the case may be. What do you, I'd love to hear your thoughts on where the discussion and thoughts are on sustainability of these programs.
That is probably the loaded question that you're asking me. Honestly, there's a challenge, I think, that there's always a commitment when you apply for any of our grant programs, a local or a regional commitment saying that you support this project and that you'll provide any funding that needs to be matched to it. But that's where the commitment stops. It's usually on the responsibility of the transit provider or the locality to make the conversation, because that's kind of where we stop at the state level. This is all local and regional conversation about how you sustain it, if you are able to sustain it based off the performance metrics that you define for your service. Now, we can identify available federal funding and other options that could be there if you are introducing new service that you would need to be prepared for, especially at the federal level, all the requirements for the regulations, compliance, reporting, everything in that regard. But at the end of the day, there is still a local component that has to be considered. And so you all in the region are in a very unique situation where you have multiple funds that could be utilized, but that is a conversation that you need to vet within your own localities to have that. Now, if you are going to start on any kind of introduction to new service, I think that is, to your point, and a good part of understanding is that, is it going to be worth the 5 years of testing and investment if at the end of the day, there isn't any conversation about how to move that forward? So that could also be a directive that as we explore the study, you also think about what would be the operational strategy. And that would be something you would have to have the TAC agree on in that regard. But in general, there are so many different models that we've seen. And I mentioned some of those projects also have private investments. So from the employers that are there that saw that there was a need for transportation, also new transportation services is a way to be able to engage new employment in businesses to launch in their areas. So for all the Amazons, for example, or any kind of warehouse services, having transportation services to move their workers has also been a way to be able to make that connection and investment on a private level. So we could explore all different options, but there is still going to be a local component that I can't speak on in confidence.
Thank you for just real quickly. That is so important. And I think to me, you touched on, what's good in Goochland, maybe not good in Powhatan, and you can't Charles City. But this is if you look at the background on page 72, this is all about the 15% GRTC. So there's regional, it's regional money. We're doing this, GRTC started these pilot things you're doing for the transit. So to me, it's going to be a blend, and this goes to the sustainability. I think you said we have a unique opportunity in this region because we have that regional component baked into the CVTA. So I would, again, we're not going to capture all this in a motion, but somebody looking at this and the TAC looks at this, absolutely we should be talking about sustainability, because you also touched, and I know it was a loaded question, I wasn't trying to put you on the spot, but you addressed what I was hoping you address, and you talked about measurement, metrics and measurements. So those are the things that you've seen, and so that has to be baked into what TAC comes back with an eye towards sustainability and the regional component of it. It's not like, Goochland's going to have an obligation, if we embrace these things, our locality is going to have an obligation, but it needs to be coordinated with the regional component of 15%. So I think it's a great potential, but it's going to require some coordination, cooperation. And to me, it's crazy if we don't start talking about sustainability and the tools you're talking about, the measurements to the metrics. So I think this is a great opportunity, but we're getting ready to step in one direction or the other that can really determine whether this, is a money pit and doesn't help folks, or really is going in a direction that will, meet the future transportation needs. So anyway, I'm getting a little on my soapbox, but I'm excited about this, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to ask questions.
Mr. Hodges.
Are we asking the TAC to take RRTPO's presentation and come back to the RRTPO with a recommendation as to the best way to take advantage in the region to the programs that Mr. Minsky has presented, and addressing sustainability and other financial related issues, and give us a recommendation. I respect and would like, I like what Mr. Williams is saying about a deep dive, but it seems like there might be an interim step where we get the staff to look at it and say, what are the best areas where this region can take advantage of these programs and come back. And then if it involves Powhatan or Richland County, if that's their recommendation, then we would potentially go into the deep dive.
And I think it's important just to note that, you know, these recommendations will come back to this body. We'll have an opportunity to deliberate on those. And if there's further CTAC action that we need, further deep dives and study, we can also direct staff as part of this motion to conduct such activity and engagement and also report back to us as well. So I don't necessarily think this is a one-shot situation where we have to figure it all out in the span of, 30 to 45 days here. The other thing I just want to put out here, because I think it's important, is we also have a private sector out here. Of course, all of us are in the business of government in some capacity in this room, so shame on us to some degree, but we have a way of thinking in that model sometimes that doesn't involve the private sector, and I do want to put that out there. Pinellas County, Florida, as an example, subsidizes Uber rides to connect to transportation outlets for their citizens within Pinellas County. There may be reasons we choose not to do that or to look at something like that, but we have a lot of private sector folks driving people around all the time. And I think sometimes we maybe get blinders on about the private sector. So and certainly we try to partner where we can, but it may be something to look at as well for CTAC to take a look at the feasibility in conjunction with staff. I'm getting side eyes from around the room. That's okay. But I mean, you know, we have to look at all of this because ultimately the comments from Mr. Williams and from Mr. Lumpkins and from Mr. Hodgeberg, we are trying to get a person from point A to point B. And that's going to look different all over the region. The needs are different. The population densities in particular are different. The roadway infrastructure is different, and lots of variables there. So I just put that out there and ask for that motion that I think Mr. Hodges has essentially crafted.
Mr. Jim.
I'm sorry, I have one. I'm sorry, Ms. Torres, I'm sorry.
Would you mind, I guess you gave us a pipeline sharing the timelines for all of those grant applications? I feel like that would be helpful.
Oh, yes. So it depends on how much momentum you have going, but our grant applications open December 1st. But you have until the end of day, February 1st, to be able to submit an application for a technical assistance grant. So you have essentially between now and February. I don't know if that will give you an adequate amount of time to consider that, and I don't want to rush your decision on that. Moving forward, that is the only application period that we have. So if it's not going to be this upcoming cycle, you'll have to wait until next year to do that. So thank you for bringing that up.
When does this next CTAC meeting? Sorry, TAC.
It's second week of October.
Second week of October. All right, thank you. Anybody have any other things for the good of the order? Yes, Mr. Hodges.
Not seeing any other comments.
Okay, very good, sir.
I move to direct TAC to work with DRPT to review the program she's presented and come back with a recommendation to this board as to the best use of those programs in this region for sustainability and financial fiscal constraint.
Does that capture everybody's thoughts? I think so. Any second?
Second.
A second for Mr. Lumpkins. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Thank you so much. much.
Next item is the carbon reduction program guidelines. Mr. Bush. And congratulations on your promotion.
Thank you, sir. All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. This is the first of 4 items I have for you today. The carbon reduction program guidelines. If you'll recall, I came to this board a few months ago to talk about the fiscal year 24 allocations. And at that time, we didn't have any policy for carbon reduction, so the decision was made to not allocate any of the fiscal year 24 to fiscal year 29 funding. So staff has spent the summer reviewing this program, reviewing what other MPOs around the country are doing, and then also working with the TAC to come to a recommendation for you. A little background on the carbon reduction program. It is a new funding source from the bipartisan infrastructure law. It's very similar to CMAQ, which means it's focused on really reducing emissions by either changing the way people are commuting or by making that commute more energy efficient by either improving intersections, changing the fuel source. The difference between this and CMAQ is focused on in NACs, really in this area, the ozone precursors, whereas this is very narrowly focused on carbon dioxide emissions. And this applies to the full MPO, so not just the non-attainment area that CMAQ applies in. The available funding, it's about $2.3 million per year across the 6-year program, so it's not a lot of funding. VDOT's original recommendation was to use this to augment the CMAQ program. So the recommended policy after TAC review is to add it in the same model that we have for CMAQ in our regional funding framework. So basically what that means is we'll score the project against our 15 performance measures from the LRTP, just like we do for surface transportation funding, for CMAQ funding. And then in addition, we do emissions modeling to make sure that the project is in fact reducing those carbon dioxide emissions. So we're meeting our regional goals and priorities and also meeting the intent of the program in reducing those emissions. The other piece of what's proposed is that we're changing references in the document. We constantly refer to STBG/CMAQ. We're changing that to flexible regional funding. So basically we can encompass this and any subsequent changes to the names of the funding sources or any additional funding sources that might come in the future. It's just lumped into one big pool as far as naming is concerned. And then projects that are submitted for funding would be considered for any funding program that they're eligible for. So in this case, if the project is a bicycle and pedestrian improvement and it's in Powhatan County, it would be considered for carbon reduction and surface transportation. So you don't have to specify. Staff will just make sure to review all eligible programs for each project. So as an example, and we've seen this before in our last round of allocations, this is kind of a quick mock-up of what that would look like. So there's 4 projects. We have identified in the first 3 columns what they're eligible for in terms of funding source. We have a cost, we have a benefit, we get the cost benefit score. They're ranked. As we work down the rankings, we look at eligible funding programs and try and use the more restrictive programs based on the scale of the project first. So then we have the most flexible source as we get farther down the list. So the intent is to prioritize projects, get as many projects as we can by being efficient with the use of the dollars across the 3 different programs. So the action that we're requesting from the board today is that the policy board adopts the updates to our regional funding framework to include the carbon reduction program as presented. There's an attachment to your staff report which highlights some of the major changes. And then as I mentioned, throughout the document, we'll be changing the references to the program names. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Questions from Mr. Bush? Yes.
Can you give us an example of one of the projects? I mean, what is it they're actually doing?
With the carbon reduction program?
I mean,
Sure.
what is one of the projects? What is it?
So we haven't funded any projects. So what we did in the previous round was just use it to supplement CMAQ. So what we could be funding with this would be bicycle and pedestrian, transit improvements, intersection improvements. There's some availability for electrification, so electric construction equipment, charging infrastructure for freight. I mean, there's a whole lot of opportunity. It's very similar to our existing CMAQ project list, but it's just, there's a few new
components that have been added with this update with the bipartisan infrastructure law.
Mr. Chairman. All right, so I understand. You've got this new pot of money, and it mirrors in some cases the eligibility for CMAQ. And what you're saying is it can be used now in place of CMAQ funding that we were using, dedicating to other things, now it can free up those monies. Is that what you're saying?
That's how we've used it so far.
So what I need to know is, what is the difference in as I'm not eligible for CMAQ in Powhatan County? What am I eligible for under the carbon reduction? What are the projects, types of projects, going back to Pat's question, that I could get potentially funded now in Powhatan County? Because again, this has kind of been a blind spot for us because we haven't had CMAQ eligibility, so I haven't been paying close attention. But now you're saying I can get something like the CMAQ funding through the carbon reduction.
Correct. So I think in terms of like the projects that we've seen traditionally from Powhatan, it would be more of like your sidewalk or those sorts of projects, any of these transit projects that we were just discussing.
There's alternatives also, isn't it?
Correct. So there's a lot of overlap between the different funding sources, which is why we're trying to move toward this single pot.
Can show me the different stovepipes, of funding, and then the different types of projects, and then I can see the overlap. And then do I apply to each one of those stovepipes, to different, because of the overlap?
So what we've done is there's a single application. So you give us the project, and then we can identify which of those three programs is the best fit. I believe in the staff report, there's also a link to the federal guidance on which project types are eligible. So we tried to include that. So if you're interested, you can look there, but we can definitely provide that at the next meeting, just a breakdown of each of the three programs and what types of major projects would be eligible. Okay, perfect. We can-
And send it around to everyone. I mean, you all put it in the pipe. We give you the project, you figure out the pipe, right? That's the process.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Very good. Any other questions for Mr. Bush?
Well, I asked the question because when you said CMAQ, I know even a left turn lane in some particular intersection qualifies for CMAQ funds because it reduces the amount of time the vehicle would be sitting there. Okay. Or a signal with the left turn, the arrow, or a flashing orange arrow. I mean, so if that was what it was we were saying, you said we give it to you and somebody else decides which pot it goes to.
Yes, ma'am, that's our
This is
intent.
CMAQ Plus, that's what I'm calling it.
Yes, exactly. I think that's a good way to think of it.
Other stuff. Okay, I get it. Everybody make a decision.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the TPO adopt the updates to the regional funding framework to include the carbon reduction program as presented.
A second and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. All right, we'll now move on to Transportation Alternatives Project Endorsements, page 81.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. This item is just an endorsement of the applications in the region to move forward into the evaluation process. So quick background, Transportation Alternatives to Mr. Williams' question is a program focused primarily on active transportation. So this is bicycle and pedestrian projects. This is a cooperative process between the MPO and the CTB. Both have money to pick projects. We work together to pick the best projects and as many projects as we can throughout the region. State policy requires that the MPO endorse all the applications, so this is really our opportunity to screen those projects before they go in to ensure anything that's selected is consistent with the region's planning. We had 20 applications that we received during the pre-app process. The final applications are due in October, and they require that endorsement to be in at that time. So you've all seen this plenty of times before, but this is basically our review process for consistency. So each project is either regionally in character or it's a local programmatic type character, and that's defined in our long-range plan. If it's local, it's automatically eligible. If it is regional in character, it must be in our constrained long-range plan to move forward. If it's not in the constrained plan, it's not eligible to move forward in the application process. We screened all 20 of the applications. 19 of them were local programmatic, 1 was regional and was in the constrained plan, so all of them were consistent with our long-range planning. So the action that's requested today and recommended by the TAC is basically the same resolution you see every 2 years, but Whereas we're required to provide the endorsement, whereas these jurisdictions have submitted the list of 20 projects, therefore, the TPO Policy Board endorses these projects as applications for fiscal year 25 to 26 transportation alternative set aside, and I missed a word on the slide, process. And that is just in the application. It'll come back to you in March for a final decision on prioritization.
Very good. Questions from Mr. Bushing, or is there a motion? Ms. O'Bannon.
I'm just making a motion.
Making the motion, thank you. There's a motion, she says. All right, we have a motion.
These are listed.
I'll second the motion to endorse these projects as presented, but I do have one question. You said one of them was regional and in the constraint plan?
Correct.
Just kind of, if it might be right in front of me, which one?
It was the Knuckles Road project in Henrico,
Okay.
so that was already listed, and that's because it's an off-road alignment, so that was the big difference there.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for that. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Next item is a TAP project, Bon Air pedestrian improvements.
Sure. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. So this item is a Chesterfield County project. It's funded with the Transportation Alternatives Program funds. It's ready for construction, but the estimate has doubled. And this is the case kind of across the board that we've been seeing where unit costs have driven up the cost of the project. It was selected several years ago and then COVID hit. The county is seeking MPO assistance to help cover that deficit as general inflation has been the large driver of the change. The project has been advertised. It's ready to go and be awarded in October. I mean, this is ready to move forward. It's ready at construction. The MPO does not have any TAP funding available. The state did not have any TAP funding available to help fill that deficit, but we do have other funding sources which could help cover the increase. And the total increase was $1.2 million. So this is a quick sketch of the project. This is very close to our old office, and it's the name implied, but it's basically a mix of sidewalk, trail, and signage and pavement markings throughout the Bon Air area. So again, trying to focus on increasing the ability of people to walk around that neighborhood. So the TAC reviewed this request at their last meeting, and staff reviewed this for feasibility, but we do have the carbon reduction program funding, which we left untapped. So what this is, in fiscal year 24, we have $2.2 million available that has not been allocated to any project. TAC's review and recommendation was to fund half of the deficit, so $600,000, and let the county cover the balance of it. So this would fully fund the project. It would allow it to move forward, but with some support from the region because of the larger trends that are driving the costs on the project. So the action requested from the policy board today is to approve the transfer of $600,000 in fiscal year 24 carbon reduction program funds from our carbon reduction balance entry to the Bon Air pedestrian improvements project. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions from Mr. Bush? Please, Ms. O'Bannon.
This is Chesterfield, but is this a regular sidewalk? It calls it a trail.
It's a mix. So there's a sidewalk. Here, let me slide here. So there's sidewalk is the yellow components on here.
Okay.
The light blue is a 10-foot trail, and this purple is the signs and pavement markings. So it's a mix of improvements throughout the area that's intended to create an overall connectivity for non-motorized users.
And just for purposes of identification, this is part of a local plan for Bon Air, a local special area plan, just for everybody's knowledge, is to try to connect these areas, particularly focused in and around schools and connectivity to schools and neighborhoods. This has been a real push the last several years in the county. I just throw that out there.
Yeah, we're doing a lot of that. I did note that you're using the carbon reduction program money
Yes, ma'am.
that we just talked about.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I will say I have an example of a sidewalk that has gone from 1 to 2.5 million over the time we've been trying to get people to donate their land or move an electric pole or that kind of thing. Yeah. Okay.
Moving utilities is not easy.
Well, it used to be each pole was $25,000. I think they're 50 now or something. And it's huge. So, all right, I'll make a motion to accept the resolution on
transfer of 600,000.
Yeah, the last one.
I'll second the motion to transfer the 600,000.
Mr. Chairman,
Motion in a second,
just a
discussion,
comment on motion.
please.
As a general statement, I'd like staff just to note this, when are we going to see resolution of the effects of the inflation or whatever the etiology is working through these projects, whether it's age, COVID, inflation, because we can't continue to go forward with planning where we see these types of percent increases in projects. That's a statement. This is not anything to do with the motion, but we need to be aware of this. And we ought to be looking at this going forward because we can't plan. If we go forward doing what we're doing, like with this project, with other projects in the pipeline, it makes their job impossible. That's my comment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and that's noted, and I appreciate the tax recommendation of going halvesies with the county on this one. With that, any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Oh, you want a roll call?
Roll call.
Oh, just kidding, I'm sorry, I thought I was trying to get y'all through here.
Chairman for life.
What is the reason, I'm just curious, why we need a roll call vote on this versus voice vote?
I don't know.
Because of the funding money?
What,
Where-
is it funding, it deals with cash. All right,
Okay. All right. All the other.
please, Ms. Firestone, thank you.
Mr. Hodges.
Aye.
Mr. Atkins. Mr. Carroll.
Aye.
Chair Winslow.
Aye.
Mr. Lumpkins.
Aye.
Ms. O'Bannon.
Aye.
Mr. Williams.
Aye.
Ms. Jordan.
Aye.
Ms. Torres.
Aye.
Ms. Dean.
Aye.
And Mr. Ridlett.
Aye.
Thank you, that motion carries.
Mr. Thornton.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Thornton. Mr. Thornton.
Aye.
Thank you.
Got everybody. All right, very good. Thank you so much on behalf of Chesterfield. Next item, CMAC project Route 1.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. This is the last of my new items for you today. So this project is the Route 1 intersection improvements at Hopkins Harwood. This is a project in the city of Richmond. It's a legacy project. So as you recall, we had a lot of discussion about the legacy projects earlier this spring when we were doing the cost estimating review. The project is VDOT administered. There's been MPO funding since FY11, so going back over a decade. The project had a significant rescoping in 2018 to reduce costs and try and keep it within budget. It's unable to be reduced any further while still achieving the project aims. Again, cost inflation driven by inflation, so the unit costs over time built up. There's just over a $1.5 million deficit, and the project has been on hold essentially since January as this deficit's been figured out. It's ready to advertise if the funding can be resolved. This is ready to move forward into construction and help complete one of those legacy projects and kind of get it off of our to-do list. This is a quick overview of the project area. So it's Route 1, Harwood, Hopkins, the kind of offset intersection. So this is trying to improve the traffic flow between that offset. So the recommended solution, this came from the TAC and staff has reviewed it, but the I-64 Express Barge project was one that the MPO approved a few years ago, which was intended to purchase another barge to move more freight on the river. The port was able to find a solution to acquire that without using the CMAQ money, which freed up the CMAQ funds. The surplus previous balance is about 2.1 million right now. So we can address this need quickly just via transfer from one project to another as we continue to close out the barge project. So the action that is requested is that the TPO approve the transfer of $1,587,314 in CMAQ funding from the I-64 Express Barge Service Expansion to the Route 1 Intersection Improvements Project. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions, and VDOT is here to answer anything about the project as well.
Questions, Mr. Bush, or VDOT, please. Ms. O'Bannon.
Well, that's what Mr. Williams was talking about. What you've done is you found money from somewhere else that wasn't needed and put it on an cost overrun, right?
Yes.
Okay. We don't
Stovepipe,
speak English.
the stovepipe, that's right, that's exactly right.
So basically, they they took it from another source that didn't need it. Okay, they found another way to pay for that, so they paid for this, the cost over. Okay.
Any other questions, comments? How long does the project have to be given the legacy designation? That's the question I have.
So we've been applying that to everything with the 5-digit UPCs. So the 5-digit UPCs are generally from the 90s. So they're pretty old.
90.
I think that works.
Yeah, mine was from 95,
That seems
and they
to
just
be
fixed it last year. We kept carrying it down, we
Right.
moved it, didn't do that, they did another study, they moved it differently, teared down, and finally the county advised, they said, we'll pay for part of it. Okay.
Always nice to get a project from the 90s off the lot. All right, very good. Any other comment, or is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that.
Say again.
When were we found?
Well.
We count the 60s.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the TPO approve the transfer of the 1.587.314 CMAQ funding from the I-64 Express Barge Service expansion to the Route 1 intersection improvements at Hopkins and Hartwood.
Second. Motion and second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? I'm sorry, just kidding. Go ahead. See if y'all were listening the first time.
Mr. Hodges. Mr. Atkins. Mr. Carroll.
Again.
Chair Winslow.
Aye.
Mr. Lumpkins.
Aye.
Ms. O'Bannon.
Aye.
Mr. Thornton.
Aye.
Mr. Williams.
Aye.
Ms. Jordan.
Aye.
Ms. Torres.
Aye.
Ms. Dean.
Aye.
And Mr. Ridley.
Aye.
So when you do a voice vote, you gotta do a pre-vote that way, so I kind of like that. Just to see if we have any issues with the water there. All right, urban boundary smoothing, Mr. Parsons.
Yes, sir, and this actually requested as a voice vote. We have a staff report on page 98, and I think the important item is on page 99, which is a map. But just a quick background, after each decennial census, so the 2020 census, the Census Bureau delineates the census urban area boundary, otherwise known as the UZA. And that's comprised of a combination of densely settled census blocks of housing units and population of at least 5,000 people. These UZA boundaries can be irregular, and they cause roads to switch between rural and urban status many times along their length. So one of the things that we do in coordination with VDOT is to smooth those boundaries to create more consistent urban and rural road segment classifications. So over the past few months, TAC has been working diligently with Miles and his team to provide suggested updates to the UZA to create the proposed urban area, the smooth urban area boundary. That map is on page 99 of the agenda packet. The UZA from the census is the dashed area. If you can see that in your agenda packet, and the peach or tan color is the proposed smooth urban area boundary. So the TAC recommendation, the TAC reviewed the proposed smooth urban area boundary at its August 8th meeting and recommends policy board approval. Staff confers with that and provides the requested action that the Richmond Regional TPO approve the proposed smooth urban area boundary as presented in the agenda packet.
And just to ask a question here, this action would result in, is it greater funding ability for projects? Why, what's the why? Here.
Yes, sir, I believe that is the case. Mr. Bushman, do you have any detailed clarification? I mean, I think it just provides a more consistent understanding of urban versus rural and the different types of qualifications that those status provide for the individual jurisdictions.
Does that sound right, Mr. Bush?
No additional follow-up.
You're gonna be in this seat 2 months, so. All right, very good. Any other questions, Mr. Carroll?
So simplistic, we're adding to the urbanized area, the new shading of RRTPO, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And part of that could be based on the fact that those census tracts were slightly lower, but have projected growth that would potentially put them above the 5,000 number for the census tract, which is why I think we're adding it.
That is correct, and that was part of the TAC review, was looking at proposed development and densification.
That was a more concise definition of what we were looking for. So thank you.
Any other further comments or discussion? Or is there a motion? This is a voice vote, I can do it right.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
All right, is there a motion? And a second, Mr. Atkins, thank you. Any further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. All right, I'm gonna just move one item here, and that's go into D, other business, and move up number 1, Community Transportation Advisory Committee Activity Follow-Up. Mr. Bush, please. And then we'll go into our reports.
Sure, thank you again, Mr. Chairman. So as you all know, the CTAC has come before this board to request additional review of its role, its purpose with the TPO, and how it can be involved in the TPO's planning work. So staff has been coordinating with CTAC leadership to review the role of CTAC based on our bylaws, the gaps that we have in our program, and how we can best provide them more input and direct work related to the TPO's decisions. So we went back to the bylaws, and the purpose of the CTAC is to advise the MPO on issues, plans, studies, and matters necessary and appropriate for providing viable and reasonable citizen input. So based on that, and with follow-up conversations with the CTAC leadership, the recommendation is for CTAC to begin taking on more of a leadership role related to our engagement efforts. So what this would do is, just like we have our technical advisory committee who informs us on the TIP, on the long range plan, the UPWP, the CTAC would be really spearheading efforts around public engagement. So this is all shaped by our public engagement plan. That's our overarching plan for how we reach out to the community, get input, share what we're doing. And then it also shapes each of our planning efforts. So in the long range transportation plan or a modal plan like the transit vision plan, we have specific engagement strategies that we have to develop on how we're going to reach out for that work product. The same thing goes with the TIP, or when we're making a funding decision, how are we sharing this information? So what this would do would be providing a CTAC with the role and coordinating with Ms. Gordon on developing our engagement and outreach strategies to ensure that the TPO's message is being heard, that we're getting input from everyone that we want to hear from. And the thought behind this is that CTAC is comprised of representatives from our different jurisdictions, but also from advocacy and interest groups who are either people that we want to reach out to and need more input from, or who already have a vested interest in transportation planning and are already experts on their own in this field as well. So the idea is trying to get as broad of a message out there by using the existing committee that we have and maximizing its potential. So in your agenda packet, there's a list of proposed tasks, sort of broken down by a long-term vision of what we think the role would be related to that task. A near-term ask of like, these are the projects that we would be working on immediately. And then a longer-term list of tasks that would be over the next few years, what would CTAC be involved in? So this is a very large shift in the role of CTAC, but it is bringing in more of a direct role in gaining and getting public input and public support for the planning that the TPO is doing. So that is a very broad overview of what's proposed. I'm happy to answer any specific questions, but the action that we're requesting today is that the board agree to these general tasks, and then staff can begin working with the CTAC to figure out exactly what that looks like in practice and how that would work.
Sure. Yes, please, Mr. Hodges.
And I think this is a great idea, and hopefully addresses a lot of the concerns that CTAC has been raised. One that I haven't seen, and maybe it's already being addressed. My CTAC representative, Mr. Martin, has always asked if with these projects that they are expanding community engagement on, do they as an organization have an opportunity to make a recommendation themselves, or is their role primarily coordination of input.
Sure, so I mean, the CTAC can make a recommendation that's in the bylaws that anything they recommend is brought up to the policy board. The issue or the main challenge with that is that CTAC's meetings are every other month. As you know, with our funding decisions, the tip, every single month, we're bringing something to you. So in terms of meetings, it just doesn't line up for a formal meeting to make a formal recommendation and bring it back. So our thought was to address this by providing a greater input, so allowing them to reach out and gain input on each of these products, which we bring back to you in the form of public comment on any decisions, but without necessarily taking a direct voice or direct vote themselves.
I see. Thank you.
Good question. Other questions, comments? All right. I'm looking for a motion to approve the proposed CTAC task assignments.
So
I have a motion.
Second.
And a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. And now we'll go back up to agency and committee reports and start with Mr. Parsons.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On page 115 of the agenda packet is a summary of actions that the CBTA has undertaken since July. I personally believe they're all significant, but I will highlight a couple. At the July 14th meeting of the full authority, Mayor LeVar Stoney and John Hodges were both elected as chair and vice chair of the authority for the fiscal year 24, serving until June 30th of 2024. And then Michael Byerly from Powhatan and Patricia Page from New Kent were both appointed to serve on the Finance Committee alongside the existing members from the city, Henrico, and Chesterfield County. We approved the operating and administrative budget for fiscal year 24 and have moved some steps forward in getting some confidential ratings developed through Moody's. So the homework that the CBTA has been doing to be prepared to provide as much flexibility in funding options as possible is continuing along its expected path. I will highlight a couple other things. We continue to work through the CBTA TAC on the Fall Line Trail wayfinding plan. There was actually a meeting yesterday morning to continue that process. And we are doing our due diligence on year-end certifications and quarterly reporting for local money that has been distributed back out to each jurisdiction in the region to make sure that it is being used for the proper transportation purposes. We have some upcoming meetings. Actually, our CBTA TAC is meeting now on September 20th. Our Finance Committee meeting is meeting immediately following this meeting this morning. So anyone who wants to hang around, I invite you to stay and attend that. And then we continue to move forward. Our next full authority meeting is Friday, September 29th.
Great, please, Ms. Dan.
So you're seeking rating with Moody's, and that is usually the first step toward possibly borrowing money or leaning against it. I just would caution with the economy going up and down, there have been other areas that have chosen to borrow money and then get trapped into just finishing one project, and years go by and all the money goes to that project. Just caution. Obviously, I'm very conservative, but I guess it's good that you get a rating, but I'd be concerned and cautious because the economy will be taking a nosedive. It is next year, it always happens. Every 5 to 7 years, we'll be stuck with no money, we'll just be feeding past project. So we have all these other pots. So just be very cautious. This is a new pot, and I would just be very cautious as to borrowing at all for the projects listed in this pot. That's just me. I'm not on CBTA, but it concerns me that we try to start financing things. That was the reason for this pot was to have cash, to fix things that we had done, we couldn't find money for. At least that was what was stated first. Just letting you know my opinion on that. Okay.
Very good. Any other comments? Great. GRTC.
Just a brief update that we will be opening our temporary transfer station at 8th and Clay on Sunday. Service will start there, so on the 10th, and we'll be doing a ribbon cutting that Monday on the 11th. So we are very excited about that.
Very good. RRTPO, Steve?
Good morning, or still morning.
Yes, yes. I'm an after that. I'm trying to keep going.
So as previously reported, our RMTA board voted to increase the tolls back in May. I can report that they were increased on September 1st, which was last Friday. And the execution of that was pretty seamless. And the second thing I have to report is that we are in the process of applying some protective coatings on our bridges, and so if you see a lot of the work being done, especially on the James River Bridge as you go across the river, that's what's actually happening. So that's all I have. Are there any questions?
DRPT. Mr. Binsky, you have anything else?
Only one item, since I've already said plenty today. We did host on August 11th our post-award workshop. So for any of our grantees that have received awards for this upcoming fiscal year, we host a workshop for grants administration and just getting familiar with kind of our processes and procedures. If you're interested, that is available, a recording of the webinar on our DRPT YouTube page, as well as a copy of the presentation. So if there's interest, please reach out and I'd be glad to get that to you. Besides that, I have no other updates.
Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Dodd.
Sitting in for Dale this morning.
He was there, I know.
He was, he absolutely was. Just a couple of quick updates on CTB action over the last few months. There were no August meetings, but the July meetings included updates to the guidelines, to the policy for revenue sharing, as well as transportation alternatives. As is usual, after the approval of every round of Smart Scale, there is a review of the Smart Scale process after each round, and that is what we will see in upcoming meetings with the CTB. Next meeting for CTB is in September on the 20th. It will include a review of the process discussions that happened in July after their July meeting. The process moving forward that really needs to be on your radar is October 17th. At that CTB meeting, the final recommendations on process changes will be presented to the CTB in November. There will be a virtual town hall meeting to gain input on that, and the final vote and approval by the CTB on any process changes for Smart Scale is expected in December. So it's important to have that on your radar. There are proposals out there that will change the number of applications that might be submitted, that way scoring is done. There's a number of different changes. I know there's been discussions at both of the TACs in Tri-Cities and in Richmond on the topic, so we're happy to be available to answer any questions on any of the proposed changes that are out there. Just
can I ask that any proposed changes be sent around to this entire body? We've obviously been through a number of rounds of changes for Smart Scale that have reduced the number of applications. The jurisdiction sounds like that might be on tap again. So I think everybody will want to know about that and have input on that potentially, and that's important.
absolutely, we're happy to do that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sure. So a couple of other
Please.
project updates real quick. Fall Line Trail Design Build 1 expected to be under construction here shortly. Design Build 2 is on the southern end. Currently working through a number of issues relative to cultural resources and specific alignment questions. We've had discussions both at a Fall Line Trail Working Group as well as CVTA TAC. Anticipate having another update on where we end up being able to go with that. That will probably have a little bit of a delay in the project schedule, where we were anticipating maybe going out for RFP on that design build the end of this calendar year. That is likely to be delayed, based on some of those alignment questions and resolutions to that. 64 Gap, Segment A is expected to be awarded by the CTB in a couple of weeks. That's very good news. And we do have an upcoming citizen information meeting on the 288 Hard Shoulder Running Project. It will be September 13th from 5 to 7 at James River High School. Again, looking forward to any public feedback that we get on that, and also appreciate the opportunity to have our folks come out to both Powhatan and Goochland County board meetings We are on schedule to come to a TPO meeting. It's out on your November agenda, as I understand it. And that's all I have. Happy to answer any questions.
Any further questions for VDOT?
Mr. Goodwin, can you, was it 5 to 7 at James River?
Correct.
5 to 7. Thank you. All right, Federal Highways, Mr. Rucker.
And real quick, I just want to take this opportunity to thank VDOT, MPO staff, as well as this board for your work in delivering a transportation improvement program. Our regulations require the governor to approve your program. The governor has approved your program, as well as the programs for MPOs throughout the state of Virginia. The programs have been delivered to the Secretary of Transportation, who has packaged the programs up as part of the statewide transportation improvement program. That program, the STIP, has been delivered to our office. The final STIP, following a 30-day public comment period, has been delivered to our office on August 31st. We've committed to the state to complete our review and approval by September 1st, about 30 days. Also, we have been fortunate to fill a number of positions in our office. We had an internal meeting yesterday where we discussed our interests, federal interests in being able to better engage you more intimately with respect to a number of the discretionary programs within the bill, transportation legislation signed by the president. So stay tuned for more. We certainly want to be able to, for example, engage with the Board of Supervisors, community groups that may be of interest, where we think that certainly can benefit for some of these discretionary programs. And like I said, we want to be able to begin the process of engaging with you and your communities on a more personal level.
Wonderful. Questions for Mr. Rucker? Moving on then, thank you, Mr. Rucker, to future meeting topics. Those are listed on page 118, just to keep in mind, Smart Scale, the Transportation Forum tentatively set for March of 2024, and then some of these other items that we'll get into, CMAC, Transportation Alternatives, Project Selection, and then a couple of dates to be determined on VDOT overview, ITTF, and then infrastructure program selection. And we'll get those out once we have some dates on them. Okay. And then at this time, are there member comments for the good of the order? Seeing and hearing none, the next meeting date is November 2nd, 2023, 9:30, right here, be here, be square.